I stood there, surrounded by fairy lights and warm laughter at my own engagement party, as my parents publicly shredded my future. They announced they were giving my entire wedding fund to my irresponsible sister. But they had no idea I'd already made my move, and the utter silence after my revelation was a moment I'll never forget. My name is Elise. I'm 28, and until very recently, I would have sworn my family was a unit, a team. We weren't perfect, but I always believed we truly had each other's backs. For most of my life, I was the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who never caused trouble and certainly never asked for anything. My younger sister, Heather, she was the wild child, always bouncing from one disaster to the next, always needing money, always tangled in drama. And I always stepped up. That's what family does, right? You help each other out. Or at least I did. My parents, though, they seemed to fuel Heather's fire, brushing off her screw-ups as growing pains. Meanwhile, they praised me for my maturity, my dependability. What I didn't grasp until much later was that dependable was just a polite way of saying the one we can take for granted. Daniel, my amazing fiancé, and I got engaged last year after 4 incredible years together. We're not flashy people. We've been saving diligently, planning smartly, aiming for a wedding that was meaningful, not extravagant. When we told my parents, they seemed genuinely thrilled. My mom even teared up, and my dad clapped Daniel on the back, saying, "Welcome to the family, son." Then they dropped a bombshell. They offered to help with the wedding, claiming they'd been setting aside money for me since I was a teenager. $40,000, tucked away just for my big day. I was floored. Daniel and I hadn't expected a dime. We'd already figured out how to cover most of it ourselves. But that gift, it was more than money. It was freedom. It meant we could fly in some family from out of town, book that dream venue, maybe even afford a short honeymoon. We set a date, secure the perfect spot, and even sent out save the dates. Everything was moving along perfectly. Then, Heather's life imploded. She lost her job, totaled her car, and got evicted from her apartment. One night, she called me, sobbing, begging for $1,000 just to get through the week. Daniel, with his usual quiet wisdom, gently suggested we say no. It wasn't that we didn't care, but with Heather, it was never just once. And with our wedding looming, we just couldn't. I told her as gently as I could that we simply couldn't help this time. That's when everything shifted. My parents suddenly stopped returning my calls as often. My mom grew cold, distant. My dad stopped asking about wedding plans. One weekend, at brunch, I mentioned the florist, and my mom sniffed, muttering, "Must be nice to afford flowers when your sister's struggling to eat." I stared at her, stunned. Daniel reached for my hand under the table, giving it a comforting squeeze. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I hoped it was just temporary tension. I even invited Heather to be a bridesmaid, hoping it would mend things. She never responded to the invite, but I figured she was embarrassed, overwhelmed. I didn't want to make things worse. A few weeks later, our engagement party arrived. Daniel's parents hosted it in their beautiful backyard, strung with fairy lights, filled with laughter. His mom had outdone herself with the catering, and friends and family from both sides were there to celebrate. Even Heather showed up, wearing a white dress, which definitely raised some eyebrows. But I just let it go. I wasn't going to let her steal my joy. I was focused on the people who truly loved us, the people who mattered. About an hour in, after Daniel and I had just finished our thank you speech, my mom suddenly stood up, microphone in hand. I blinked in surprise. No one had asked her to speak. She tapped it a few times, and the crowd quieted. "Can I just say something?" she asked, her voice dripping with performative sweetness. "We're so proud of Elise and Daniel, truly." My stomach started to knot. "But we've had a change of heart about something." Daniel's hand tensed in mine. My mom smiled warmly at the crowd, then at me. "We've decided to give the wedding fund to someone who truly needs it right now. Someone who's going through a rough patch. Elise's sister, Heather." There was a beat of absolute silence. I thought I'd misheard her. My stomach lurched. She's had a hard year, my dad added, stepping up beside her, his voice attempting a tone of noble sacrifice. We know Elise and Daniel will find a way to make their wedding work. They're responsible, but Heather needs a safety net, and we think this is the right thing to do. My ears were ringing. I couldn't move. Daniel turned to look at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. I stared at my parents, trying to process the casual cruelty of it all. The way they announced it publicly at our party like it was some grand, altruistic gesture, like they expected applause. I don't remember physically moving, but somehow I was standing there, taking the mic from my dad's hand. Every single pair of eyes was on me. I took a deep breath, and then I smiled. "That's fine," I said, my voice calm, measured. "Just one thing." I paused, letting the tension build. I already moved the money last week. A ripple went through the crowd. My mother's face twitched. "What?" "I moved it," I repeated, still smiling. Since it was a fund for my wedding, in an account under my name, I transferred it somewhere safe, just in case. My dad's eyes narrowed. "Where?" I looked directly at Heather then, who had stopped mid-sip of her drink, her expression a mix of confusion and indignation. "Somewhere you won't find it." And that was when the yelling started. Heather nearly dropped her glass. "You can't do that," she blurted out, her voice rising above the gasps and murmurs. "That money was meant for me. Mom and Dad said." "Mom and Dad don't control my bank account," I replied, still holding the mic, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "They may have contributed to that fund, but it's been under my name since I turned 25. I made sure of that. Remember when you forgot my birthday, but showed up the next day asking if I co-sign on a car loan?" A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd. Some people tried to hide it. Others didn't bother. Heather's face turned a deep shade of crimson, and my mother's jaw clenched so tight I thought she might crack a tooth. "Elise," my dad said sharply, his voice lowered, trying to regain control of the narrative. "This is not the time or place." "Oh, I agree," I said, setting the mic gently back on the table. "But you made it the time and place when you try to humiliate me in front of everyone I love." Daniel stepped up beside me, placing a supportive hand on my back, and gave my parents a long, unreadable look. "We were trying to let this be a night about celebration," he said, his voice firm. "But you decided to make it about your disappointment that you couldn't manipulate Elise anymore." "Excuse me," my mom snapped indignantly. "We gave her everything. We supported her whole life. And I'm grateful," I said calmly. "Truly. That's why I never pushed back when you made it clear Heather was the favorite. I kept helping. I paid her phone bill more times than I can count. I covered for her when she missed family events. I even stayed quiet when she stole from me." Heather gasped. "That's a lot. I found my missing bracelet in your room, Heather," I stated, the words coming out effortlessly. "You borrowed it for a party 3 years ago and never gave it back. Then, when I asked about it, you cried to Mom and made me apologize." There was a long pause. Everyone was frozen, watching. No one was eating. No one was drinking. Just silence and tension, like the moment before a storm hits. My mom finally found her voice. "You're being cruel, vindictive. This isn't like you, Elise. You don't get to define who I am anymore," I said, my voice rising a little. "I've been the good daughter for 28 years. I played by your rules. I took care of everyone, and I kept my mouth shut. But that ended tonight." I could see the ripple of discomfort moving through the room, but not in a way that shamed me. Quite the opposite. A few of my cousins were nodding. Daniel's sister was standing with her arms crossed, glaring at my parents like she'd seen this show before and finally had confirmation it wasn't just her imagination. My dad tried one last time, a softer approach now. "Sweetheart, just think about your sister. She's struggling. She's always struggling," I said, more quietly now. "And you've always made it my job to fix it. But she's not my child. She's not my responsibility. She's your daughter. And maybe if you taught her accountability instead of handing her money and blaming me for her mistakes, we wouldn't be standing here right now. Heather looked like she wanted to throw something. Instead, she just stood there trembling, arms crossed, biting her bottom lip so hard it turned white. "Where did you move the money?" she demanded. "Tell me right now." I looked at her for a long beat. "I used part of it to put a down payment on a house Daniel and I love. A place we'll start our life together. And the rest." I smiled. "I opened a new account in a bank that none of you know about under my married name. So, no, you won't be able to find it. Ever." Daniel gave a slight nod, and I could tell he was proud. Not just because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, I hadn't let them bulldoze me. I hadn't retreated or tried to smooth things over for the sake of family. "We're leaving," I announced, grabbing my clutch. "Thank you to everyone who came and supported us. We're grateful." As for the rest, I glanced back toward my parents and sister, their faces frozen in disbelief and something else, panic. "Good luck." And with that, we walked out of the backyard, past the guests, past the twinkling lights and clinking glasses, through the gate, and into the night. We made a full 10 feet down the sidewalk before my phone started buzzing like crazy. First, it was a message from Heather. "You're disgusting. You've always been jealous." Then, another one from Mom. "You don't walk out on family like that. We need to talk." Then my dad, in a last-ditch effort. "Please don't do this. Don't let this ruin everything." I turned off the phone. I don't know how long we walked, just holding hands in the quiet, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a daughter balancing on a tightrope. I felt like a woman who had finally stepped off and landed on solid ground. 3 days later, they showed up at our door. Daniel saw them first. We'd just come back from the farmer's market, arms full of fresh fruit and flowers. The kind of weekend ritual we were finally getting to enjoy without wedding spreadsheets and vendor calls hanging over our heads. We were laughing, really laughing, about something ridiculous the cashier had said when his face suddenly changed. He shifted the bags to one hand and gently touched my arm. "Don't freak out," he said under his breath, "but your parents are standing in front of our building." My stomach dropped. I looked up, and there they were, my mom, Dad, and Heather, standing on the sidewalk like an uninvited, heavily judging committee. My mom was wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast, her lips pressed tight. My dad had that fake polite smile he used to wear at parent-teacher conferences. Heather was leaned against the fence, arms folded, eyes red like she'd been crying or fuming. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. "Elise," my mom called out, "we need to talk." "No, you need to leave," I said, walking right past them toward the door. "This isn't your home." My dad stepped in front of me before I could reach the buzzer. "Sweetheart, please. Just 5 minutes. Did you not hear me at the party?" I snapped. "Or was the microphone not loud enough for you?" "Elise," my mom said, her voice syrupy but tight with restraint. "You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be. We came to apologize." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? You came here, to my place, unannounced, after publicly trying to humiliate me, to apologize?" My mom hesitated. "We didn't mean for it to come out like that." "That's not an apology," Daniel said, stepping between me and my dad. "That's damage control. And you should have done it days ago, not waited until people started talking." My mom's eyes flared. "You don't know this family, Daniel. Stay out of it." He didn't even flinch. "I know enough." Heather finally spoke, her voice sharp and cold. "You're not seriously going to keep the money, are you? After everything Mom and Dad have done for you?" I turned toward her slowly. "You mean after I spent my entire 20s cleaning up your messes? Covering for you? Bailing you out of situations no adult should need rescuing from while you got a party and coast and play the victim? That money could have saved me," she hissed. "No, Heather," I said calmly. "It would have delayed you, just like every other handout. And don't think I didn't notice you were wearing new shoes and a designer bag at the engagement party you couldn't afford to attend." Her jaw dropped slightly, and I saw her glance down as if she'd forgotten what she'd worn. My mom opened her mouth to jump in, but I cut her off. You knew that party was important to me. You knew what that money meant to us. But instead of coming to me privately, or even trying to reason with me, you hijacked the mic and tried to ambush me in front of everyone I love. That wasn't love. That wasn't family. That was manipulation. My dad finally let out a long breath. Look, we all made mistakes that night, all right? But we can fix this. Let's sit down. Just the five of us. No yelling, no accusations, just talk. I paused, not because I was considering it, but because I was genuinely shocked he still thought this was salvageable. There's nothing left to talk about, I said. You showed me exactly where I stand. And I'm done pretending that's okay. Heather scoffed. So what? You're just cutting us off over money. I looked her straight in the eye. No, I'm cutting you off because for the first time, I stood up for myself, and you all made that the problem. There was a long silence, and then my mom, always the dramatist, shook her head with mock sadness. This isn't who you are, Elise. You're better than this. You don't turn your back on your own family. And that was when I lost it. You turned your backs on me years ago. I shouted. When you made me the unpaid babysitter, the emotional punching bag, the default emergency fund. And I kept taking it because I thought one day, maybe you'd finally see me as more than the responsible one. But now I know you never will. You'll always see me as the one who owes you. My voice cracked on that last word, and I hated that it did. But I saw something shift in their faces then. Not guilt, but offense. Like I was the villain, like I was ungrateful. Elise, my dad said, his voice now cold and clipped. If you walk away from this, don't expect us to be there when things fall apart. Daniel stepped forward again, his voice calm but firm. She's not walking away. You already pushed her, and she doesn't need a safety net made of guilt. I looked at them all one last time. 3 people I used to bend over backward for. I felt not angry anymore, not even sad, just done. I turned, buzzed us into the building, and walked away without looking back. We sat in silence for a while after we got back inside. Daniel made his tea while I sat on the couch, trying to process it all. I half expected my phone to buzz again, another flood of guilt messages, but there was nothing. Just quiet. Until about an hour later, when I opened my email and saw the subject line, your wedding account, urgent. I opened it, and what I read made me shiver. The email was from the bank. Apparently, earlier that morning, just hours before the surprise doorstep ambush, someone had tried to access my wedding account. They hadn't gotten far because the security questions didn't match, and they failed the 2-factor verification, but it had triggered a fraud alert. It wasn't hard to guess who tried. I immediately forwarded the email to Daniel, then called the bank's fraud department. They confirmed someone had attempted to impersonate me over the phone. Thankfully, my security protocols held. The account had already been frozen temporarily as a precaution, but now they were offering to permanently lock it unless I came in to verify everything in person. I made an appointment for the next morning. I was shaking by the time I hung up. Daniel didn't say anything right away. He just stood behind me, gently rubbing my shoulders. Then, after a long pause, he said quietly, "They're desperate. That's the only reason they'd stoop this low." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt hollow, but not the kind of hollow that hurts. The kind that feels like finally clearing out a room that had been full of junk for too long. I realized then that the family I had loved so fiercely, so loyally, had only ever been loyal to the idea of me. The version of me that kept quiet, played nice, and never challenged their entitlement. But the moment I stopped being useful, the illusion shattered. The next morning, I visited the bank and transferred the funds again. This time, into a new account at a credit union Daniel and I had just joined, tied to our new house. I asked the bank to add extra protections, flagged my information with identity monitoring services, and made sure every password tied to the account was brand new and impossible to guess. By the time I got back home, Daniel was already in full "let's protect our future" mode, shredding old documents, updating our mortgage login, and putting together a folder of all our important financial records. And that night, I made a decision. I wrote a letter to my parents. Not a text, not an email, a real letter printed and mailed. It said, "Dear Mom, Dad, and Heather, this will be the last time you hear from me for a while. After everything that happened at the engagement party, and after discovering someone attempted to fraudulently access my account, I need space. Space to heal. Space to protect the life I'm building with Daniel. You may see this as abandonment. You may call it overreacting. But the truth is, I've been abandoning myself for years to keep peace in a family that only ever asked me to shrink. That ends now. The wedding will go on without your money, without your input, and without your presence unless I receive a sincere, unconditional apology. Not excuses, not justifications. A real apology followed by real change. Until then, please do not contact me. Elise, I sent it certified mail. I wanted to be sure they received it and that I had proof I'd said what needed to be said. The silence afterward was deafening. A week passed, then two. Then, out of the blue, I got a single text from my mom. "We got your letter. I hope you're happy." I didn't respond. The wedding came 6 months later. It was beautiful, intimate, honest. No fake smiles, no walking on eggshells energy, just people who loved us, who showed up not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. Daniel's dad walked me down the aisle, and his mom cried harder than anyone. We laughed, we danced, we toasted. We celebrated love in the truest sense. Love that's earned. Love that's respectful. Love that lifts, not leeches. Afterward, as Daniel and I stood on the balcony of a rented villa, barefoot and giddy with champagne, he asked, "Do you think they'll ever come around?" I thought about it. About the years I spent sacrificing my peace. About the party. About the bank email. About the voicemail Heather left me weeks ago, calling me a selfish traitor. And I said, maybe, but I'm not waiting. We clinked our glasses and looked out at the sunset, hand in hand. Because for once, I wasn't carrying guilt. I wasn't carrying anyone else's chaos. I was just Elise, free, married, and finally, truly at peace.